Chris Higgins is the author of 6 books for teenagers. Her first, 32C That's Me, was published in 2006, and her latest, Would You Rather, will be out in October. Our reporter Mike Dees spoke to the West Cornwall-based writer about her influences and why she decided to make this her career.
I had breast cancer and I was an English teacher, mother of 4 girls, and I had to finish school. I decided that I had to fill my time really, so I started writing, and I actually joined a course at good old Cornwall College which was writing for the media. I went over lots of different kinds of writing, such as writing for television, writing for radio, and so on. And one of the components of that, the last component, was short stories. And by that time, I'd already had some short stories published in Scriffer, local Cornish publication, and also I'd got runner-up in Good Housekeeping competition and so on. So I thought instead I'd try the start of a novel. I wrote 3 chapters of the book that eventually became 32C That's Me, and it was suggested that I send them off to an agent, which I did, and the agent said, "Oh, I like this, I'd like to see the rest of it," and I hadn't written the rest of it, so that was a wonderful incentive to sit down and write the rest of it, which I did in 8 weeks, which sounds incredibly short, but actually that book had been in my head for 2 years.
32C, as you say, came out of your experience with breast cancer, and that's written into the story. With your other teenage novels, where does your inspiration come from?
It comes from everywhere and everyone. For instance, Pride and Penalties, which was my second book, which is about a girl called Spider who wants to play rugby, and her brother Will, who actually is very good at rugby but would prefer to be on the stage. That came ironically from a very local story. I don't know if you know this, how many times rugby has been in the Olympic Games. Most people don't know the answer to that.
I don't know anything about rugby.
It's actually 4 times, and one time that is particularly interesting was in 1908, just over 100 years ago, when England got into the final and played against Australia. Australia won, unfortunately. England got the silver medal. But the interesting thing about that was that it was made up of a completely Cornish team, because what happened was that counties played off one against the other and Cornwall won. And I decided that if you had somebody, if your grandfather or great-grandfather or whatever had played, then you'd obviously want to play rugby yourself. This particular father, who also wanted to play rugby for England, had his leg broken, and all he wanted was a son to continue his aspirations. So the book is about a girl who is really trying to fulfil her father's ambitions, but also loves the game of rugby.
Your 7th book is coming out shortly. That's a huge output.
Yeah, I started writing novels in 2003 and was taken on by Hodder, and my first book was published in 2006, and that was 32C That's Me. Then Pride and Penalties was published in 2007. It's a 50-50 thing, which is about skateboarding but also stalking and obsession. Was published in 2008. A Perfect 10 was published at the end of 2008, and that's about gymnastics and bullying, but it's written from the point of view of the bully, so it's a little bit different. And
you're addressing a lot of contemporary issues through these books.
Yeah.
Is this something you've seen through working in the schools, or through your own daughters growing up?
Yeah, I was fortunate enough to have 4 daughters. When I started writing, they were teenagers, or the eldest was in early 20s and the others were teenagers.
That may not be fortunate.
It's fortunate if you're a writer, writing for teenagers. And also, I was a teacher for 29 years. So, I had all that. I was immersed in that teenage world, which is, why I suppose I started writing for teenagers. It wasn't intentional. It wasn't a deliberate decision to write for teenagers. But when I started writing 32C That's Me, the first few chapters, I suppose I started writing for that audience without even really being aware of it.
Love You Babe.
Love You Babe came out this year, in January this year.
What's
and
the storyline?
It's a very privileged girl called Gabby. It kind of predates the credit crunch, really, or rather predicts the credit crunch in a way, even though I didn't realise that when I was writing it. She comes from a very privileged background. Her father's a city analyst, and she has 2 brothers, and it's a very sort of middle-class, comfortable family with a mother that's incredibly embarrassing, slightly older than average parents. And then her mother, in her mid-40s, and her father's in his mid-50s, suddenly decides to have another baby, which is the most mortifying thing that could happen to a 13-year-old. And then what happens when she has the babies and she actually goes into labour at Tesco's, which is, pretty mortifying as well. When she has the babies, she gets postnatal depression. And this poor girl, Gabby, who really didn't want the baby in the first place, ends up basically being the primary carer.
When you form your characters, do you have particular people in mind, or are they a melange, or how does this shape up?
I think it's probably the first thing that happens really is that a character comes into my head and just sort of pops in there and won't go away. I mean, plenty of characters come into my head, but then they kind of disappear. But usually what happens is that a character just sort of stays there, lodges there, and won't go away, and gets a name. Often it's a name I don't even want her to have or him to have. And I suppose that you're always affected by people you meet. But I don't think that there's any of my characters that are a take-off of anybody I know, if you know what I mean. But there's certainly sort of attributes of different characters of different people go into a character. And often people think that they recognise themselves, but they're never right.
Are your stories consciously set in Cornwall, or maybe in Wales, where you came from? How does that work?
2 of them are consciously set in Cornwall. Pride and Penalties, yeah, I mean it's sort of Cornish rugby. It's a 50-50 thing. Even though I never say it, I think I have set it in the St Just area where I used to live. Although I never actually say that. It's about a girl who moves down from London with her mother and a younger sister, and there's a reason that they've moved. They have a secret. In fact, the secret is that the father has been put in prison for something that he didn't do. No, they're set all over the place. The latest one that I've just finished, which will be coming out in January, Tapas and Tears, is about a Spanish school exchange. So half the book is set in Spain, around the Malaga region, and the other half is set over here. But over here, I'm not sure where.
Chris Higgins, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Chris Higgins' books are available through all bookshops, and there's lots more information on her website, www.chrishigginsthat'sme.com. Books Plus is a Hearsay production for Cornwall Online Radio, produced by Julian Rowe.